Hey friends, so today we are talking to Peter Brown, the author of The Wild Robot. It's been in theaters for a while now. Now you can watch it at home digitally. Uh, Peter, the book is amazing. The movie is amazing. But really quick, I wanted to say that I work with second graders, and we recently read The Creepy Crayon, which is a book that you illustrated. And
Yeah,
they were like so focused on the words and the drawings. I mean, it was fantastic to see that. Um, but
it's great.
to get on the Wild Robot, though, on your website, peterbrownstudio.com, you have this great blog post about the beginning of the story and like how it started to the finished product. So,
Mhm,
friends, if you get a chance, go to the website and read that. But if you can, give us like a shorter version of that, like how you initially thought of the idea to
mhm.
when you finally had that book in hand, and then when you got the call that this was going to be a movie.
Yeah, well, it all started with a drawing I made. I'm an author and an illustrator, and I spent a lot of time just sketching and doodling in my sketchbook, and I drew a picture of a robot in a tree, which is the kind of thing that a lot of illustrators draw probably and don't really think much about. But for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about this robot in a tree, and I began wondering how a robot might survive in the wilderness. How would a robot be able to adapt to a wild environment? And what would a wild animal think about a robot? These kinds of questions popped into my mind all of a sudden. And so I started researching robotics and artificial intelligence and nature and animal behavior and finding a lot of really interesting differences and things that those have in common. Robots might seem sort of unnatural, but I was finding a lot of interesting crossovers between robotic programming and kind of animal instincts, or almost like a programming. So anyway, I was learning a lot of interesting stuff, and I began developing the story about a robot who finds herself stranded in the wilderness, and in order to survive, she ends up mimicking the animals, their behavior, as animals are like experts at survival, different techniques used by different species. And she ends up learning how to speak with the animals and then develops these relationships. And all of a sudden, she has a friends and a family, and she's trying to become part of this community. And we're talking about real world relatable subjects wrapped in a story about a robot out in the woods. So it's pretty shocking how personal the story becomes, which is one of the things I'm most proud of. So I worked on the story and I figured it out. It took years for me to kind of tinkering with it. It was the first novel I'd ever written after a career of mostly writing and illustrating picture books. This was my first novel, and so I took my time and eventually finished and wrote and illustrated The Wild Robot, which was published in 2016. And before the book was even published, DreamWorks contacted me because they had heard through the grapevine that I was working on this book about a robot in the wilderness, and they were immediately interested. And so, in fact, they had actually been kind of approached me while I was writing it. Even before I was done, they wanted to see an unfinished version of the story, but I refused to show them anything that wasn't up to my standards. I was afraid I'd waste this opportunity by sending them something that wasn't very good. Um, so they waited, and then as soon as I finished the manuscript, we sent them a copy, and they almost immediately made me an offer to adapt it into a film. So that was before the book was even published. So I've had this deal with DreamWorks since before the book anybody even knew about it. Frankly, they knew about it because they have people whose job it is to kind of pay attention to what's going on in kids publishing. But so it's a pretty wild experience. And then, of course, animation takes forever, and so it's been 8 years, and now the movie's finally out. But so it's been a long journey from the initial idea to now having the movie come out. But it's been quite a fun ride.
That's fantastic. That's also crazy to know that they somehow heard about this and are already like, we got to get on that before anybody else does.
I'd had a pretty good career in picture books, writing and illustrating picture books, and so I think they were familiar with my work and kind of paying attention to what certain authors and illustrators were working on, and somehow they heard about it. So yeah, it was definitely a shock to me to be approached with an unfinished project with interest from DreamWorks. So
That's fantastic. As you said, it took you a long time to write this, so to get this out there. But as you're writing, obviously your imagination is like working overtime because you're like picturing this in your head. So when the film finally came out, what was that one moment that you had envisioned in your head one way, but you were like, I want to see how they do this?
yeah,
Um,
well, there's a lot of moments like that. I mean, obviously my book is sort of the foundation of the story, but these are creative wizards, right? The folks at DreamWorks are so good at what they do that I was excited to kind of see how they interpreted things and changed things. And um, you know, there's there's a scene of Roz she builds this home for herself and for her son, Brightbill, this goose. Uh, and it kind of looks like a beaver lodge, right? But it's on dry land. And then there's this wintertime scene where all the animals, it's this really rough winter, and it's animals are in danger of like freezing to death. And so she brings all these animals into her home, and there's like a little campfire in the middle, and it's warm and cozy and everybody can survive. But it's like you've got predators and prey next to each other, right? Like there's an owl and a mouse and a fox and a bear and a rabbit, all these things that don't really belong in the same space are suddenly in this kind of lodge together. That's a scene from the book that I had to handle really carefully because I didn't want to sugarcoat things too much. I wanted to be real with readers. The fact that animals eat each other in the wilderness, that's kind of like how the world works. And so I didn't want to pretend like that wasn't true. And so that scene is a real funny example of Roz trying to juggle these animals with their own instincts and their own habits and trying to make them all be able to coexist together in this space. And so I was excited to see how they handle that in the movie. And it's one of the funniest scenes, I think, in the movie, actually. But also, really kind of heartwarming too, because the animals decide, it's in all of our best interests for us to just get along for now, not forever, just while we're in here. Let's just cool it and be good to each other. And then once we go outside, we can go back to the way we usually do things. I don't know. It's actually a pretty moving scene, but it's also fun and funny at the same time. So I thought they handled it really well in the film.
Yeah, that was a great scene to see like everybody all together like that. One of the things that you did kind of mention earlier was that how like it took a different meaning, the movie or the
Hmm.
book, because I know you wrote it before you were a parent, but now that you have a son, how has the movie and the book changed, I guess, like your perception of the story itself?
Well, it's funny. My wife and I had our first child 10 months ago. So he's not really book reading age yet. But I spent a lot of time thinking about what it's going to be like to read The Wild Robot to him when the time finally comes. We're not there yet. I think we got probably a few years left. But, um, when I was writing the book, I wasn't a parent when I wrote the story, even though that's a story in large part about a parent becoming Roz, the robot becoming a parent and learning and struggling with parenthood. Um, but as a non-parent at the time, I just spent a lot of time thinking about my own childhood and my own parents and my mom in particular. I was raised by a single mom. Probably not a huge coincidence that my story is about a robot who becomes a single mom. But and so I thought about my own life a lot and my own upbringing and how my mom handled things and how she juggled a lot. Being a parent is not easy, and being a single parent is really not easy at all. And so we get a sense of that from Roz, right? The way she sort of stumbles through things and she makes mistakes and uh, she's doing her best, but it's an overwhelming situation. Um, and I love that. I feel like there's a lot of authenticity to that. I think one of the reasons why adults are responding and kids, but adults in particular are responding so well to this movie is because they can relate to what Roz is going through, um, which I love that. I just love that this family movie is really a family movie, right? It's got something for kids and it's got something for adults. It's not talking down to anybody. It checks all these boxes, and it's really pretty remarkable in that regard.
Yeah, I saw it with my son, and then like afterwards, like I just had to give him a big hug. I'm like, this is just a beautiful movie. But Peter, thank you very much for your time today. Friends, The Wild Robot is now available on digital to watch at home. Definitely check it out. Make sure you stay after the credits for a little like fun part. But it's
Yeah,
definitely a great movie, and thank you very much for your time today, Peter. You have a great day.
my pleasure. Thank you.